Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatuhu ta'ala wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. We're taking a look at a question that comes time and time again. It is one which people have often written to me about. They've asked me, they've asked many people, and sometimes I've actually even thought that is there much point into going into this discussion again, since it has been repetitively answered on so many different forums, on different whether it's fatawa or discourses and discussions. Nevertheless, the question is on bid'ah. That can I shed some light on the understanding of bid'ah? Does it have a division? The division of bid'ah, is that valid? So what this means, so first of all, let me simplify the question. What that means is there such thing as a good and bad bid'ah? Right, so, and the reason people are asking is that there are certain practices at times which are considered somewhat controversial, or they have some controversy surrounding them, and they are grouped and classified as a good bid'ah. So this is where, just to give you some background where this is coming from, for those of us who are completely unfamiliar with this topic, a bid'ah linguistically is referring to an innovation, an act of innovation within the deen. So we are talking about a religiously innovated matter, not something which obviously is to do with the dunya, talking about matters of the deen and what is the ruling on them. Now, first of all, just to clarify the ruling, traditionally there has been, and I mean by traditionally, classically, there has been a divergence, really, a kind of split, which I suppose has led further down the path, increased to some extent, and then maybe also reunited. There was classically this divergence between the madhabs. The madhab of Imam Malik, rahimahullah, Imam Malik himself is quite vocal on these matters. You have also subsequently perhaps the school of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. They may be grouped on one side, if you like. On the other side, you will find the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, and also subsequently the school of Imam Shafi'i. Now, these two camps, if you like, these two groups, the former, Imam Malik predominantly, especially from the Salaf, and this includes many other people from the Salaf as well, they did not accept a division of bid'ah. So they did not see that there could be anything that the Prophet ﷺ or his companions did not teach us to do with the deen that could be good. For us to come up with something could in no way, according to Imam Malik, his understanding, have some goodness in it, religious goodness, some religiosity about it, because that would mean, as Imam Malik explains, that there was a path to Jannah, or something that would get you to Jannah, which the Prophet ﷺ did not. Either the assumption is, either you're suggesting, this is from Imam Malik's thought, and these are his actual words, that either you're suggesting that the Prophet ﷺ was unaware of this path to Jannah, or that he was aware and thereby concealed it from you. Either ways, Imam Malik's response is very harsh in a way, almost, against any type of innovation. He describes them all as kullu bid'atin dalala, is a misguidance and something which should be refrained from a person. However, there is a difference, which is incredibly important that we highlight. It is that Imam Malik, although he is very harsh against a lot of the bid'at in some of his wordings, in his fatwa, which are documented throughout whether it's throughout his teachings, so especially in the Mudawwana and in other places wherever his fatawa are transmitted. The question is that although his wording is harsh at times, the ruling of that particular bid'ah or that innovation is quite often just seen as makruh. It is seen as discouraged. It is not described as haram. So they describe it as something it's better not to do as opposed to do. But it's not haram if it is done. So this is the distinction. Now, many of the Hanabila, the Hanbali ulama also seem to take that trend of the school of Medina, Imam Malik's school, which took a very harsh stance, if you like, traditionally on dismissing any form of innovation. And like I mentioned, I mean, you can find this, for example, a very early source will be in Ibn Waddah's book, which he transmits with chains, going back to Imam Malik, all these rulings where he discusses many of these things about bid'ah, about innovations. He provides chains. He himself was a muhaddith. Also, Abu Bakr al-Tartushi provides references and chains going back. You could actually look at the individual fatawa of Imam Malik in the Mudawwana or in the other books like the Nawadir wa Ziyadat that have been transmitted. You just have to look up the Masail, which are points of controversy on these matters, and you can see Imam Malik's attitude towards them. Now, in the other group, you have the likes of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, and their subsequent followers. Their understanding, what comes through, although they don't speak, it is allegedly Imam Shafi'i does speak on the term bid'ah, defining it as al-bid'ah bid'atan, but we're talking about the concept at a greater depth. Imam Abu Hanifa, as far as I'm aware, doesn't directly comment on it, as in saying bid'ah is of two types or anything like this. However, his fatwa seem to cater for bid'ah tul hasana. So what that means is there are certain practices which, although the Prophet ﷺ did not do them, nor did the Salaf, but because they fall under generic guidelines which are sanctioned within the deen and legitimate guidelines, therefore the action should be also legitimized. That is the debate, and I'll come back to the debate in a moment and give it some more detail. Right, so Al-Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, they feel that these things are, they feel that they're not necessarily makruh. In fact, they may be encouraged. So you will find that the category of mustahab within the Hanafi madhab, many of the things, and I'm not necessarily saying everything, but there are certain things within the mustahab category that fall as mustahab, that they are recommended to do, but they are not sunnah. So you will see that the Hanafiya divide their categories from sunnah mu'akkada, sunnah ghair mu'akkada, the emphatic sunan, the non-emphatic or non-emphasized sunan, and then they have recommended. Now this category totally does not even exist in the Maliki world of fiqh. In the Maliki world of fiqh, anything recommended is the sunnah ghair mu'akkada. So you've got the sunnah mu'akkada, the emphasized sunnah, and then you've got a recommended category. That is the ghair mu'akkada according to the Malikiyah. Now according to the Hanafiya, you have the sunnah, the regular sunnah, the one-off sunnah, and then you have a recommended action. The question here is, how does the action become recommended if it's not from the sunnah? Because if it was from the sunnah, even a one-off sunnah, then should it not fall under the sunnah ghair mu'akkada category? And that's because there are many of these evidences that are not necessarily from the sunnah, but they feel that they fall under broad guidelines which are good. So Allah says, if'alul khair, that do good. And Allah says, وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ, that come together on goodness. So based on these, they have produced certain rulings, like let's say for everybody after salah to make a dua in congregation. Now this action, as an example, if I was to use it as an example, is categorically not from the Sunnah. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ never practiced things like that. Neither did the companion in general. And I don't. When I'm saying this, I am trying to be as objective as possible in defining the fact. So this isn't an attack or a criticism towards anybody that practices these things. I'm trying to tell you. So I mean, just in case somebody's feeling an urge to almost critique me or criticize me, I'm just simply relaying the facts. That's all I'm doing, right? That this was not, I mean, somebody might try to show you a narration from somewhere that the Prophet ﷺ did some dua, or somebody did some dua and other people raised their hand. We're not talking about isolated examples. We're talking about a practice. The salah would take place 5 times a day in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ would never make a custom of raising his hands after dua and after salah and people raising them. In fact, the hadith in Tirmidhi is that the Prophet ﷺ would immediately leave. Mostly, sometimes he would sit and talk, but there wasn't this practice. Now, this is seen as a recommended practice. The reason being is that people feel that this falls under, like this group of people, let's say al-Imam Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah, and other people like from the Shafi'iyya, they will say, well, this falls under, well, we know dua is a good thing, and we know that we are encouraged to do, there's a broad guideline, that وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ. So the dua is from birr, is from goodness, doing good actions. And Allah says, collectively help each other to do good actions, like in a group type of manner. So now we put these two together and we have a net result of we should make dua together in a collective manner. The only problem with this from the other group is that they will say, well, this is not actually from the Sunnah. You see, the Messenger of Allah never actually taught us this. Now we understand your argument of putting these two things separately together. However, bringing them, keeping them separate, they may have their individual virtue. Bringing them together, however, you have a new net result, which was a practice that is new. So this is to give you the background to the debate. Okay, so you now have some understanding that this is where the debate, the angle is coming from. Now, you will see this also, and I say a trickle or a ripple effect of this ideology, if you like, or this concept, this notion, right throughout the fiqh. So on many occasions, the Maliki madhab will consider several things discouraged. Reason being that the Prophet, neither none of the Salaf were upon this practice. Okay. Whereas you will see in some of the other schools, there are certain practices which are permissible and in fact encouraged, because the angle that they're looking at is, yes, the Prophet ﷺ didn't do these things, but he never said don't do them. He never stopped you from doing them. He never said don't do dua in jama'ah. So therefore you're not actually contradicting anything. And then obviously the broad evidence is about doing good things collectively, etc. So that is the background to this bid'ah discussion. Having innovations does the deen cater for good innovations? And innovation, just to add another layer to it, as I've explained, touched upon before, it is an act of worship. We're not talking about non-worship actions. So they are actions that are brought together as a ritual. They are ritualized, and it's this ritualization that these madhabs who traditionally were against this whole concept of bid'atul hasana, that they condemn, the ritualization. So sometimes there may be certain actions which in themselves everybody agrees are good. So if you take, let's say, actions to be a spectrum, and you have those things that begin, like let's say beginning with permissibility, you can just, there's things you can do. Then you enter the realm of legislated action. So if this is a spectrum going all the way right up until it reaches, let's say almost, it goes right through sunnah into obligations. Now when things begin, they will begin with just permissible actions, and then it enters the realm of legislated actions, what they call al-amalul mashru', that these actions are legislated now, that the Sharia has introduced them. So now in the first section of this spectrum, you will encounter actions that the Sharia has legislated, but min ghayri tawqit, but without specifying or without restricting, if you like. So they're unrestricted legislated actions. So they're like freelancing, if you like. So it's like saying nafal, like praying nafal for Allah, for the sake of Allah, praying rak'atayn, 2 rak'at, is a legislated action. It has been legislated in the Sharia to do so. Like as an example, praying 1 nafal hasn't been legislated. So it's not a legislated act. Like a person couldn't just say, I'm going to pray 1 rak'ah as nafal. This is a voluntary act. It is not legislated as a religious act. We're not talking about witr salah. We're talking about nafal, praying just a voluntary prayer. It is not recognized. So there are actions which are legislated, but they're almost like freelancing, if you like. There's no specification to when they must be done. So nafal now, a person can pray nafal whenever they like. Okay, you can pray 2 rak'at nafal whenever you please, whether it's 2 a.m. in the morning, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, however you please. If you were to move further down the spectrum, you will enter a realm where some of these actions now become specified with certain times. So let's say praying 2 rak'ah every time you enter a masjid. It's called tahiyyatul masjid. Or praying 2 rak'ah if you wanted to do istikhara. Or if you wanted salatul hajj, you want to ask Allah for something, you pray 2 rak'ah. This is still in the voluntary realm, but you've moved from freelancing into something restricted within some context, that it occurs with a situation. So they're situational, or they're kind of temporal, to do with time. So you have that. So maybe praying 2 rak'ah before something happens at a given time, or after. These examples I gave, like tahiyyatul masjid or doing such and such. Now these, if you move further on, you will then get sunnah, which the Prophet ﷺ, I mean, there is an overlap, by the way, in some of those recommended actions which have been legislated and set. And the sunnah, what some people might call sunnah ghair mu'akkada, non-emphasized sunnah. So like tahiyyatul masjid will fall under that. These will be called mustahab or mandub in the Maliki madhab. Okay. Now, and then you've got sunnah, that which the Prophet ﷺ was consistent with, and the Maliki add their own type of definitions to it, saying sunnah must be that which the Prophet ﷺ was consistent, that he did consistently, but also that he offered in jama'ah, for example, in salah. They say so not only ma wadhaba alayhi, what he consistently did, but he also, they say, adharahu bil jama'ah, that he kind of established it with the jama'ah, and hence the Malikiyas. So that becomes a critical point, why then some of them don't consider, for example, the rak'atay al-fajr, and we call the voluntary part of the morning prayer, we call it fajr, and we call the obligatory part subh. So fajr, the rak'atay al-fajr, are not categorized quite often as sunnah according to the Maliki madhab, because they weren't offered in jama'ah. That's just some additional information. But anyway, my point of me mentioning this is, if you have all of these actions on this are recommended, as in good, they're rewardable actions. But if you were to take those which were sanctioned and legislated actions that had no specificity about them, that they were freelancing, like praying nafil is good. And if you were to specify the time or the day or the location, so spatially or temporally you were to add some restrictions, there would immediately, from the perspective of the Maliki madhab, be a question mark. That why have you done that? So as an example, a person said, if a person was to say, every Saturday I will pray 2 nafil, or I'll pray 10 nafil, or whatever they want to pray. So right now, the fact that they've said they've restricted this action, which was a freelance, it was a free-floating action with a specific time. That's not necessarily a problem, but it's a question mark. That why? The way they answer will determine the outcome of that action. If they were to say, if asked by the Sharia, why have you specified Saturday to pray, let's say 10 nafil or 8 nafil or 2, and if they were to say, well, I'm working during the week and I have Saturday off, I'm relaxing, I wake up, I don't have much to do, and I want to consistently pray, so it's a great time for me to do something, and I can do that with regularity, then that is a commendable action. That is a good thing. The Sharia will honor it, it will respect it, and they will have, inshallah, what is deemed to have a great reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for doing so. If, however, their response, because it's not about their answering, it's about what's going on in their mind. It's about the objectives, the maqasid behind what you're doing. If they were to say, that the response was somehow ritual, it wasn't habitual. See, the first one was more of a habitual, oh, well, I'm not working on Saturdays, I have a bit of time. It's convenience is the key word, the operative word. Fine, alhamdulillah. If, however, they were to say that the reason is, and they were to come up with some religious reason, like, well, I think Saturday was the Sabbath for the Jews, and I think we are more deserving than them to, like, let's say they came up with any reason, but a reason that has religiosity in it, that has some form of religion in it. It could be, just about held on by a thin thread, but some form of religiosity, religion, ritualization associated with it. If it did, that would be deemed a bid'ah. The Maliki school would immediately see that as something which should not be done. So the intention of a person can render his whole action from being a good and rewardable thing to something discouraged and something that should be avoided. So you can see the jump based on the person's intention. Now, I do recognize that's from a Maliki perspective, and people may say from the Hanafi perspective and the Shafi'i perspective they're a lot more accommodating for bid'atul hasana, which is true, they are. So I'm not denying that difference of opinion, that it doesn't exist. It does exist, and I'm telling you that. Furthermore, I'll even tell you that several centuries, the Maliki madhab for several centuries did not accept it, remained on that understanding of Imam Malik. What you find possibly around, maybe creeping in around the 500s, 600 Hijri definitely creeping in. By the 700 Hijri, so almost about 600 years after the Prophet ﷺ, you start to see these practices of what are deemed, or what is the subject of debate, what they call bid'atul hasana, good actions, but innovated, as in they weren't actions which exactly were done in that way by the Salaf, by the Prophet, the companions, or the Tabi'in. So the question is that you see this coming in around especially around the 6th century Hijri. I mean, it's about the 7th century, 600s. 700s is definitely there, definitely. It then moves on to become very widespread. So first it begins being, especially within the Maliki world, from non-existent to maybe, it's scarce, but it might be, it's maybe, there are some isolated incidents of it. It's not something which is so, it's not, let alone prevalent, it's not common, it's not a phenomenon which is something that you can generally encounter, but it starts to increase, and then by the 600s it's definitely there, definitely. By 700s I would even say it becomes the majority practice. Okay, some people, what was the reason for this in places like the Maliki world, where they had this understanding that Bid'atul Hasana doesn't actually exist? I mean, Allahu A'lam why that was. Some people had linked it with things like the plague that struck the world and struck huge parts of the Muslim world as well, and how in the absence of finding a cure, people felt it was a spiritual cause, if you like, for which they were suffering. This is one reason that has been offered by people, that and hence they turn to religion, but turn to cleansing themselves from sin. That's an understanding. Another understanding is that with the fall of the Murabitin and the Muwahhidin, what you had, a lot of them were key expansionist states and empires. So they were very, what was very central to them was the concept of jihad. And so they built, everywhere they went, they had what were known as these type of barracks that they would set up, which they called originally the ribat, hence they were called the Murabitun, the al-Murabids within, in English, and the Mohads in English for the Muwahhidin. Now, with the collapse of those dynasties, a lot of those ribats became vacant and empty, and you start to see that a lot of them are then subsequently taken over and become what are known as zawiyas, throughout especially North Africa or places like parts of Al-Andalus and stuff like this. Maybe some people say that's what assists in the spread of these practices, etc. But coming back to the point that around that time this becomes very common. Even the Maliki ulama of the time, the majority of them, do start to accept these actions, and they start to say that we will accept Bid'atul Hasana. So the Maliki ulama do accept it as well at a much later stage, almost 600-700 years after, in Hijri. So almost like you're talking at least 500 years, 600 years after Imam Malik. The ulama from the Maliki madhab, a lot of them turn to accepting these practices. What is interesting, however, though, despite their common practices accepting it, they still in the books continue to generally document the practices as makruh. So if you see the Mukhtasar of Khalil, if you see the commentaries on it as well, although they will give the later day opinion now, saying such and such said it's okay, but they will still mention whenever these practices are discussed. So for example, recitation in Jama'ah, praying in Jama'ah, doing dua, or recitation in Jama'ah, or making dua in Jama'ah. These issues are mentioned in the Mukhtasar of Khalil or in other fiqh books. They will still document them as makruh actions within the madhab. However, where they expand on them, they will say, however, so and so said it was okay. So they may mention Ibn Rushd felt that it was okay, or other ulama later on, Ibn Arafah and other ulama felt this was fine to kind of do, and it became, like I said, the common position at a later stage. So at a later stage, most of the madhabs pretty much unite. I say unite, there isn't an absolute consensus, because there's always people who have disagreed, but a lot more of the madhabs seem to be in agreement in accepting these actions. So that is the ruling. What my response to it is as simple as that look, bid'ah, the division of it, there are two opinions, right? That no and yes. The early school of Imam Malik did not accept it for several hundred years. The later school did accept it. So these opinions, both opinions exist within the Maliki madhab. If you're asking my personal opinion on the matter, my personal opinion is that it is always safer to stick with the Sunnah. And that was the understanding in Medina at the time of Imam Malik. That is the understanding that I personally adhere to. I don't agree in condemning people outright in their actions. If somebody is doing an action which is seen as a bid'atul hasana, I mean, alhamdulillah, if they feel it makes them, it makes life easy for them, if they feel that there's some goodness in it for them, it's bringing them closer to Allah, and that is their belief, then alhamdulillah, we respect that, we honor it as something which is an aid for our brothers and sisters in Islam. As to, it does not mean at the same time you are not entitled to hold an opinion which was the opinion of Imam Malik and the early school of the Maliki. And this, unfortunately, I must say, is unfortunate that we have seen some people trying to almost hijack the opinion of that group, saying yes, Bidatul Hasana does exist. They hijack it to present it as the only view in Sunni Islam, and that is inaccurate, highly inaccurate. It's absolutely wrong. It's a disservice to the great Imam, or to the great Imams of our Ummah, like Imam Malik, who contributed a significant portion of his life dedicated to this deen, and a huge part of his teachings focused on things like this, where he speaks expansively on bid'ah right throughout his fatwa. So to say that nobody within, sometimes we do hear statements like nobody within Ahl Sunnah would deny these things. That's not true. Imam Malik, who is the legend of this Ummah, the Imam of Dar al-Hijrah, and many who come after him, regardless of, and sometimes people will say, provide me discussions on this from the early Imams and so on. You simply just have to read the rulings in the fatwa books. So read what, for example, when you'll speak about Qadi Iyad or Bakr ibn al-Arabi, people shouldn't just read a sentence and take that out of context. Read the actual rulings. So when people say, oh, but Qadi Iyad or Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi or Ibn Abd al-Barr may have said, when speaking about bid'ah, that, oh, but it can be of kinds. The question is, what exactly are they talking about? People will say, Qarafi says this. He says there are 5 kinds and so on. And he does, and so do the other ulama say this. But then read what kinds, because the matters of controversy here, or the matters that are being debated, they actually include those kinds in the makruh category, because they then actually give the rulings on this, and they say it's makruh to do this. So I'm just saying, for people, what I feel is unfair is to try to silence the voice of another opinion just because it goes contrary to your opinion. Look, at the end of the day, these both have existed right throughout our history, throughout the legacy of al-Islam. The main thing is trying to move forward in really cultivating mutual respect. That is incredibly important. And inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to practice that, to teach it, and to convey this legacy of this deen to those who come after us. Wa subhanallahi wa ta'ala amma yasifun. Wa afdalu salati wa salam ala al-qa'il al-mamnoon. Al-madinatu khayrun lakum in kuntum ta'lamun. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.